we're going to go through some very basic, fundamentals of setting up and working with a Drupal website. We're going to use the most recent version, Drupal 9, so that you're in a good place to explore with the most recent technology. And we're going to use a system that will automatically spin up an instance of this. What we're not going to get into is the sort of server setup that if you're doing this yourself from a Linux server and you're trying to get everything set up. I certainly have done that and I can speak to it, but I have not included that as part of our agenda today. So because it will take a minute for the site to spin up, what I want to do is to present that, and everybody should feel free to follow along if you wish. It could be interactive, and then you can ask questions, but it's also completely fine for you to just watch, and then I will leave some time for Q&A, and we can interactively mess around with what's on the back of the site. So if you do want to follow, this is simplytest.me, and this is a great resource for experimenting and learning about Drupal if you're trying to evaluate how it works. This site, you can just type in, typically it's used for testing the modules, which are the ways you can extend Drupal, but I'm just going to type in Drupal, and it's going to give me the option for Drupal core, just the plain old Drupal. And when I select Drupal core, there's lots of different versions of this. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll just select the most recent version of Drupal 9 and click Launch Sandbox. I could have selected other collections under advanced options of modules and so on, but we'll just go with the plain vanilla, nothing fancy added. Let's talk a little bit. So I give you a little background on myself. So I run MakeHaven. I also have been the administrator and set up and do all the configuration of makehaven.org. And on that website, it will allow users to create accounts with special profile information. It sends emails to staff that then ask us to go and check out their profile and okay them. It allows us to do checkouts on tools that are followed by quizzes. The user takes that quiz and then it initiates an action which puts a pending status of this credential or a badge that the person will have earned, which then yet another user who has a different set of permissions can go in and say, yes, they've now completed their safety checkout in person, which then produces a file that our control systems on our machines reads. It's just a JSON file, it's a text file, and can control the system. So, not only is our website acting as a regular website and collecting submitted form information and storing it in a database, but it's actually providing some functionality for the organization. Before that, I was working at the United Way as the director of digital resources for New Haven. And I was actually working on digital resources in Hartford and in coastal Fairfield County, and was using Drupal in all of those locations and working on an implementation to implement in several other locations for the United Way. And so I learned a whole lot about the system and how to implement it and what it can and can't do, and was working on integrating it with various, fundraising type of activities. So Drupal is a CMS, content management system. And there's several competing players. The one that is probably most recognizable is one called WordPress. And WordPress is a great system that you can set up, and it was really built to be easy. WordPress essentially evolved out of a more blogging world, and then it developed these other systems as it came along. It was easier to install. More was just baked in than Drupal. But if you wanted to do something at an enterprise level, if you needed flexibility and to be able to control it, it was often Drupal that people turned to. So it's the more often selected in institutional settings, although you can also use it in other settings. For example, Yale University uses Drupal as their university-wide open source system, and they have a central deployment system that then allows any department to request that they have a custom Drupal site. They spin up an instance of that site, and then that department, within the confines that have been set by Yale University, can develop their own customized Drupal instance. So Drupal background is more from programmers, and well, they're all from programmers, but from people that had a little more rigor in their thinking about architecturally, how do you compartmentalize and systematize the system to be generic, scalable, and flexible. That being said, it also competes when you talk to individuals who are on the front guard of programming. They might turn their nose up at Drupal because it does sit in that middle. So it's a content management system, and it does have some assumptions baked into it. Not everything is completely abstracted out into completely flexible units. There are some things that you have to undo if you're going to do something really unusual in it. Now, this does seem to be taking a moment, perhaps because we are all, a few of us are doing it at the same time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the back end of MakeHaven so that you can see a live site. And by the time we have finished that, you should, this generic version will have been finished. And so I'll just change what I am presenting. All right. So now we are on the MakeHaven website, which is actually running an older version of Drupal. I want to get it updated. It's on my list. And I'm logged in as an administrator. And so this is the event we had today. I can see the various administrative things I can do. I can see the results of what you've submitted. I can view registrations. There's all this information. Now, if I go to edit this item, and in Drupal, they're often called nodes, and a grouping of nodes that would have the same characteristics would be called an entity. So this entity will have various fields within it that can be changed and modified and worked on. Of course, this is, maybe we're having a internet slowdown or something. Well, while I'm waiting for things to clear up, I'll take some initial questions on this, and hopefully by the time we come back, things will have worked. All right, so we have one question here. Did you have to do code in PHP to get MakeHaven done? Or does Drupal CMF have enough features to allow you to create something like MakeHaven without PHP at all? I did not use PHP at all, with the exception of going into the theming templates, and I tweaked the position of some of the template for theming. But other than that, I do not think that I touched any code. The only code that I used was CSS in order to do the styling. So that's the power. It is very, very incredible. And Jay asks if Drupal has Docker deployability. Yeah, I don't see any reason why. So, Docker, for folks that don't know, is a container system that allows you to create instances at a particular hardware level. So you're not emulating the entire stack of hardware. and allows you to run applications that are isolated. And there's no reason that I don't think I've run Drupal in a Docker container, but there's no reason you couldn't run it. It should be totally something you can run in a Docker container. The backend, you see, I have all sorts of fields. I have the status, I have the type of event, I have the link to join the event, buttons, I have PayPal settings that can be expanded, images that have been uploaded, dates, the actual description, instructors, so I can add instructors. And this will, if like Lior was an instructor, I just start searching for Lior and it's going to find his account. I can click it and then it will reference all his profile information as a instructor. I have stuff under here as far as tools and advanced. I have some terms and conditions. And then I have these settings, which are built into Drupal. So the path is where it's located. You can add additional URLs. I use this a lot for just short URLs, so it's easy for somebody to remember that something is at such and such /policy. Breadcrumbs are these things that go across the top. So I'm saying that all these should be at embedded inside the events. And then there's authoring and publishing information. So you can, whether it's published or not published. So that's what it looks like behind the scenes. But the way that Drupal is organized is you have these basic categories. So content, for example. So this will list all of the content. And there's content types. Now, MakeHaven, I've been working on it for a while, and a lot of these aren't used. But I have lots of different content types. For example, all the tools, you can go and you can see the tool, and there's both information that you see as a user, like just the picture of the tool and what the safety requirements are and so on. And so those are assets. We also use it to store information about like the value of the tool and the picture of the barcode for that tool and other things like that on the back end. So I'm able to consolidate a lot of tracking into one thing. So that's like an asset. And so these are the types of content you can add. So if I go to add an asset or an item, it's going to come up with this stuff, whether it needs the buddy system, eye protection, whether it's associated with a particular badge requirement, the item categories, as a manual, the item plate, all of these things. Those are all content. And this is stuff that you expose to your users. But that is set up in the structure. Now, there's lots of elements of structure, and we can talk about more of them. But the core one that I want to talk about is content types. So with a content type, this is how you define what the content you're going to add is. It's declaring the categorizations. So you can, of course, add a content type. And it's as simple as starting with a description and some other options. And you'll be able to then to add fields. But it's probably more interesting for us to look at an existing one. So we'll look at this one that we've looked at, the asset. And we'll go to Manage Fields. And what it's going to do is it's going to break down. So these are the fields that somebody who is a user is going to see. A user being somebody who is entering information into the system. And these are, so fields are collected inside of content types, and then nodes are repetitions of the pages, the instances of that type. And I can go ahead and I can rearrange these items. I can say that something should be asked for above, I can put the name of the item at the end, whatever I think is easiest for the person entering the data. And then within each of these, so for example, there's the image of the item, and I'll zoom in a little bit so it might be a little easier for you to read. The image of the item, and it's using the field type of image, which is, so this defines any field can have specific characteristics, and then the widget, this is how the person's going to enter that information. Now, if I click edit on this, I can rename it. I can have a default image. It can accept what kind of images it will upload. When it uploads, it can choose what directory. It can automatically, this is all built into the image module, which is a module that I think comes pre-baked into Drupal. And that's what handles how images are uploaded and stored. And so I can say, what is the maximum resolution that will be accepted? Otherwise, it will resize. The minimum resolution, the maximum size, so you're not eating up your hard disk. Whether or not it will accept an alt field. So an alt field is for people with various disabilities. So it will describe like you are looking at a machine. An additional title field. How will it be previewed? So when you're in that that form, you might have seen that there is a little preview of the image. So Drupal will resize and provide your images in lots of different formats. These are user defined. It comes pre-baked with these like 4 at the top, but you can add to them. So, you know, all we need is a thumbnail when we're submitting. So we'll do that. Whether or not this particular field is publicly visible to everyone, private, or we can assign custom permissions. So whether somebody can create, edit, view, and then these are the different roles within the system, which I'll also get to, but you can see we have administrators. System is a role that I used for basically when it's talking to another non-human entity, like our DORC, our control and access management systems. But we have managers, we have coordinators, which are our facilitators, instructors who might need to see who's registered for an event, but don't need other things, businesses. I'm not using that functionally for sort of where you can access, but I'm using that category. Members, so members are the only people where the door will open for them. Authenticated users are a category for anybody who can log in, but does not necessarily have additional permissions. And then I use member pending approval to give limited access to people who have registered and are awaiting to be reviewed, but have not yet. So the only ones that are baked in are authenticated user and anonymous user. So anonymous user is anyone who is not logged in at all. Now, this is an example of, I think the field visibility gives you public and private, so only the author and administrators. Custom permissions comes from having extended this by adding a module. Then you can choose the number of values. So this will allow you to upload multiple images. In that case, it will have just like a little button that says add another. And then where does the destination go? So inside the server, there is a, for the actual file storage, not for the field display. So these are 2 different concepts, but for the file storage, you can store it in private files, which has an additional level of protection. And that's even if somebody has a direct URL, they cannot access it because the server itself will treat it as denied. The reason you put anything in public files is it's typically more expensive computationally to do the checking in order to load those files. So public files will load faster, but if you want those files to be private, you would do that. So each field, so there's various settings, then there's the widget, how it's displayed. There's a couple of different options. So you can add it like cropping. That's a module that I added. So we go back to the content type. When I'm building a website, I think about what types of things you need to work with. And then you have each of these. So you have this image, and we just did this deep dive into what an image field has in it. And hopefully those elements made sense and show you the flexibility. But here I'm using text. I'm using something called a term reference. So if you've ever used tags, it's essentially tags. You can label things with terms. And lists, so these are drop-down menus. A node reference is the ability to refer to something else on the website. So for example, a set. So if an item, an asset that we have, a tool, is part of a larger set, I can just use this reference, and it's using an autocomplete widget. So if I say this wrench is part of the wrench set, I can start typing the word wrench, and the wrench set will pop up, and I'll say yes. And now those two will be related through a link. Long text, the body, that's sort of just the description. A YouTube video, so that will preview a YouTube video and create it as an embedded video just off the link. Manuals is just a file to upload. And then we have lots of, we have a few different types. But what you should get out of this is that you can build the collection of information. I'm going to jump over to display, because then you have to figure out, how are you going to show this information when it is pulled up? And one of the things that I didn't get when I first started, that took me a moment to realize, is there are these things called display modes. So right now we're in default, and there's special ones. I don't know why I have question on there. Probably not something I'm using. You can ignore that. But for example, you can have teaser. So a teaser, you don't want to explain all the information. You use a teaser when you're listing what those different pages are. For example, on our events, you have the preview that shows just a short bit about what the event is, just some critical information, and you click in to get the full description. So in this one, default is going to be what shows up in every instance, including the full description. And teaser is defined for the times when we want to just show the smaller piece. And so this is the same as when you're creating what fields you're collecting. You are dragging, you can move these fields around. In this case, by default, it always have a label. And then you can, most times I'm choosing to hide them, because I try to make it, I try to make it so things are intuitive enough that you don't have labels everywhere. But for example, the status label seemed appropriate. You have a formatter. So this is how the thing displays. Most of the time, you're going to use something like a link. So if it's a tag, you want it to link to all the rest of the content, or just plain text. Just show up as the text that you are. So like the description of the tool, that's going to show up. Well, it's just default. I could say plain text. Default's probably HTML in this case, or you can trim it. So these different field types are going to have different ways of being displayed. So like the image, this has all of these options. Now, when you first install, you don't have all of the options. I've added several of these options. The display, so there's these displays here, and there's a little gear that allows you to change the elements again. So for example, the image is going to be showing an image, and I set up a criteria which is called content width. And so that image will now use the content width. And when I click it, what will happen? Well, in this case, I like the idea of the full image opening up so somebody can see the full image. You could choose that it goes to the content, either one. And so you go through and you define all the ways that this displays, and you can do the same in the teaser. And in the teaser, you can see that there's a category for hidden. So you could just, rather than have it in the top, you could just drag it down into the hidden zone, and then you won't see it in your teaser. So teasers in this way are only the description and the image. So that is, I think, kind of the critical part of structure, because these sites are really built of the content types categories and their and the content within them. I'm going to just go quickly through and describe what some of these other parts are. So blocks are an additional option. So when you define a theme within Drupal, you define different zones. And so this is a depiction of MakeHaven. So we have the navigation bar, the top bar, a primary menu system, a highlighted area at the top, secondary, a help bar, and then a content area. And you can assign a block to any of these areas. So that will mean that when that block is displayed, it shows up in that defined space. And we have lots and lots of blocks around MakeHaven. Blocks can be generated through just simply adding a block. So, this is demo block, demo. And then I can say, my content. And so when you have, when you're defining content, by default, it will filter out tags that are harmful because people could inject JavaScript and so on. I'm an administrator, so I can say full code and do all sorts of things. Filtered is generally what's used for untrusted users, and they can only then use HTML tags that are here. And then you have different themes, but I'm inside our makerspace theme that I showed. Why don't we add it to the primary area? And then we can choose where it gets listed. And so why don't we go ahead and we'll say all pages, we'll list all pages, but only of the content type event. Okay. And if I wanted to do pages, I could list them. They're actually their URLs, and then the block would show up on those URL pages. So I'm going to save this. And now when I go to our events, I'm going to go to event, open one up. There's my content demo block. It will now appear on this event and all other events. And now there's these nice little hover options. So if I want to go back into that block, I can go into it and I can modify it and change it and remove it. So I'm going to undo it for event, save it. And when I refresh the page, it's still there. It's probably because it uses a caching system. So one thing that happens, this is all websites actually. In order for pages to load faster, a lot of times websites will compute things once, and then they'll only go back periodically to check them. So it's unusual that you would be removing a block, and it's not normally urgent. So I'm going to go to configuration, and then I'm just going to go, there's lots of configuration options, but I'm going to go down to one called performance. And this is one of those things that really confuses people at the very beginning is caching. So I'm using all this caching. When you're just developing a site, you can turn off the caching. And so I'm going to clear all caches. This will mean that the next page load is a little slower. So it'll tax the system because it's having to recalculate the whole, all of the things it's calculating. But it will ensure that things have been pre-calculated are reassessed. And I'd say that when I have new people working with websites like this, okay, it's probably that I set something wrong. Oh, because I just added it to all pages except those listed, and I was restricting by content type. So it's going to be on all pages, including the home page. So in this case, let's just take a look. I probably broke the home page. Yeah, I broke the home page. There's a demo block right there. So we're going to just take this off. I'm going to have it appear in no spaces, and I could have said only the listed spaces, and that would have worked. The caching thing is still probably true. I'll go to the home page. Maybe in this case, it figured it out. It got it without having to clear the cache. So that's structure. Appearance. Most of the time, you're going to get a pre-baked theme. You're going to install the code, you're going to select it, and then you're going to style it. I use a base theme called Bootstrap, which is a framework. It gives you a very basic set of structures for your website. And then I go through and I add CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets, in order to make it look the way I want. So you're not programming something from scratch. There's a couple of things I went in. They didn't have certain classes or tags that I wanted to add. And so I went in and modified the code on the theme. And so there's a module that has Bootstrap pre-assembled for Drupal. And I just installed that. And then there's in fact some easy to access settings about how buttons work and components and other things. And these options will be different based upon what theme you would select. Drupal also has two themes. It has an administrative theme and a user-facing theme. So I'm using Bootstrap as the user-facing. And then there's I'm using 7 as the backend, so that when I'm working with it, it's consistently looking like an administrative interface. You talk about people. So people is where all of our users are. And users have profiles that can be assigned to them and fields that are associated with them. So I'm going to go, so you can see there's this huge list, and I can say, people who are active, people who have certain permissions to do certain things on the site, or people who have a role. Let's look at administrator so we can find myself. That way I'm only revealing any of my information. Oh, I must be using myself as a test case. Well, we're going to go into Kate. Oh, yeah. So I click to go into, so I go to edit, and you can see the same thing. There's various fields that we collect. There's the roles that we have her using as part of the website. We have a record of the waiver that she signed in that case. And then this is using a module called profiles, where we can have different profiles with additional information about that person. So I build profiles, which then have information that's attached. Here you see an example of the cropping widget. That's a widget that can be added to the info widget, so that you can see that I could go in here and modify that image, which is great for profiles. And you have various other information that's collected about her. And you have the same thing. We manage the display. How is this displayed? So inside of people, you might be asking about where roles and permissions come from. So I'm going to go into permissions. And so here in permissions, one of the things is there's a lot of options. So for each role, for each module, there are a set of you can say on or off for each permission. So, these are things about formats and who can see the format selection options. These are things about blocks. Who can administer the blocks, change their positions? Who can inject CSS? Only an administrator. Who can use the charts and administer them? So you go through and this gets longer and longer the more modules you add. At the very beginning, you go through and you figure out what kind of roles, which are bundles of permissions. And the way you create roles, you just go to this little role tab, and here are the roles. If I wanted to add another one, I could add demo role. Add that role, it would show up in this list, and then I can start adding and subtracting the permissions just for that role, or go back to that master list of permissions and start saying what that person can do as far as adding and removing content. So that is people and permissions. We go into modules. And so this is where I have added modules from the community. So it's an open source community, and people find problems, they code it in PHP, and then they contribute it. One thing is to make sure that you're always using modules that are well adapted or adopted by other people, so that you're never out on your own having something breaking and causing problems. You see that there's several that I've tried or that I'm not using right now. The ones with the check marks are what I'm using. And Drupal has a whole bunch of modules, so it's modular itself, and you can turn things off to make the system more lightweight, or you can keep them on. So field UI, that's that thing that we were using where we're dragging fields up and down and changing them and so on. If you do not need to have that capability in your system anymore because you've programmed it, or you're a master coder and you're doing it all by code, you can turn that off and that interface will disappear and not be available until you turn it back on. So you can update modules, you can install modules. So if you click install, it's depending on your configuration setup. You can go and just drop it in by FTP, or you can just copy and paste the URL as a zip and drop it in here, click install, and it will go and fetch that, download it, and make it available to install on your system. Where do you get modules? You get them on Drupal.org, and there's a big directory with data about who's using what, so you can decide what module is appropriate, has a description. And there's a whole grab bag of good and bad modules. Rookie mistake is to add too many very specific modules. What you want to do is you want to have fewer modules that have more generic utility, in my mind, that makes your site more flexible. So configuration. This is just all of the options. So essentially, each module you install will have a page for options. And I will go, maybe there's one for like Google Analytics, where we'll go legal. All right, so the legal is a thing for the waivers. And so it has what the waiver looks like. It has also tabs. It's like, all right, so when do people have to do it? Every time they log in, or just when they create their profile? Is there any exempt roles? How do we display this thing? How do we do it? So each module will have a different set of configurations that you go into. And so configurations page is just where all those go. Reports is, it's where information goes. So if you want to see saying that I have an update to do, so periodically there's security updates. And so I will do this update. I'm using a system called Pantheon, which assists with those updates. I basically go in, click a button, make sure everything worked, and then say, make it live. And so it will keep you secure by adding those updates. And you can always click and see what is what's there. Modules, in addition, will also have updates. Right now, this must be a security update because it's red, and then these are just feature updates. And so I can choose to update them or not. I'm going to show you one last thing and then go to questions. So probably the most powerful thing, so these are just things I added at the end for MakeHaven. They're not in the standard install. And I seem to have had bad luck with the Simply Test Me. Just never finished building that website, which is why I am using our own site rather than a blank slate, but it's conceptually the same. So I was going to show you views. So views are amazing. And what a view is, and we'll build a new view, it is a query of the system that displays in a custom way. So let me think. Well, we've been talking about our tools. So I'm going to say demo tool list, right? And so what am I going to show? I'm going to show content. I could show users. There's all these various types of things, but I'm going to show content of type, and I'm going to show an asset. And do I want to create it as a page? Yes. And how do I want it to display? This is how calendars and everything is. I'm going to display, for now, I'm just going to show it as an unformatted list of, we'll start with titles, just because that's simple, and 10 of them. And I say continue and edit. All right. And so I get rid of the side menu. Zoom in a little so you can see the options. So we have this, and it's going to show us a preview. And so here's just a list of these tools that it has pulled up. And it's going to walk us through all the ways that it is pulling that up. So it's formatting it as an unformatted list. It's fields, and it's selected the title as the field. And the criteria for showing is that it's published, and that it's an asset, and that it's sorting it by the date that it was posted. Well, we don't see that there. So let's add that as a field. So now I can search within the system. Okay, so I'm going to narrow by posted. And so the content posted date, and I'm going to add to all displays. It's all displays within this view. And all right, so a label, sure, we'll add a label. When we have a date, how do we want that date formatted? I want it formatted as this simple date format, which is all these formats are defined in your configuration. So I add new formats whenever I want them. What time zone? Well, it's the default, which is East Coast. If we want to add certain styling elements, rewrite it. There's a bunch of other options. We don't need to worry. But here it is. We've added the post, the date this was posted, and the element. I can go in and rearrange these fields. All right. And I want to see the image of our tool. So I'm going to say, what did I probably call it? Tool image. This is where using like a good convention. So is it maybe equipment image? Equipment material, equipment used. I'm gonna just read through what these are. Event image, item. So I've haven't followed my own convention. I've called them items, equipment, and assets. And sometimes it gets confusing. That's why you should have good conventions. All right. So, I just said go ahead and show the original image. These are way too large. So I'm going to have to go into that item. And I'm going to say, formatter, show it as an image. Let's just go ahead and we'll use one of the ones I defined, right? This larger 600 by 600. When you click it, go to the content that it's associated with. All right, so it's going to be much better. It took a second to recalculate. And so here is our list of tools. In fact, I want to make this list easier to read, so I'm going to reformat it. I'm going to make these smaller. Let's make these 200 by 200. Okay, small, nice and small. And I'm going to use a different type of formatting. I'm going to use a table. And so this has some options about the table. Let's just go ahead and say, yep, table. And now we have this as a table. And I might want to, say, filter that table in different ways. And so now I can say, let's go ahead and we're going to, the item, I think I called it title. Lots of titles. Okay, content title. And so I can add that, but I'm going to expose this. And then I'm going to say tool name, right? Oh, I'm adding this to sort. I meant to add it to filter. So I'm going to click remove. Filter, search, title, and okay, just the regular old content title, which is where I put the name. So I could say like right here behind the scenes, like is equal to, let's just say saw. Oh, well, there's probably none that are equal to saw. We want contains any word saw. So if it contains the word saw, so there's all of the saws in MakeHaven. Surprising number of saws. There's multiple pages of them. And I could say list all of them or list them, The reason you normally start with 10 is just if you make a mistake and you try and list everything on the website, you can cause memory issues. So we like the saws, but now I'm going to say, let's make this more interactive. And we're going to use has a word, but we're going to expose this to our users. And we're going to say tool name, right? Has any of the words and apply. And so now the tool name is there and the user, I think I defaulted had it pre-populated, but if I want to search now band, I can apply. And that's available to all users. So I'm now going to save demo tool list. I'm going to remember what that URL is. I'm going to save that. And I'm just going to go to demo tool list. So here's the demo tool list, and I zoomed in so that it kind of messes the menu up. And you can see there it's filtered by SAW by default, and I can say banned. Apply, hit apply, and well, so same. Some of these saws also are banned saws, but so now it's just bands. It's missing the other ones that are saws. So that's showing you some like building custom. So you create your content in the structure. You create the structure of the content. You create the content. You define how the individual fields behave. You define the roles, and then the permissions within those roles. And then you can use views to create all sorts of queries that display that information in unique ways, and then add interactivity through the way you define those views. Just so you know, in addition to that, you can have contextual cues. So one thing I use within our individual profiles, all these badges show up because they're views. And so I can go in here and I can edit the view for pending badges. And you can see that rather than creating a page, it's creating a block. And what I do is you can add a contextual filter. And a contextual filter will do something like, hey, go ahead and look at the user ID that's defined through the URL, because when you load that page, the user page has the ID in the URL, and then only show the badges related to that particular user. And so I can contextually change how and when something displays. So views is very, very deep and very powerful. And I would say those are the core concepts. So I'm ready to start answering some questions. I see that. Did you have to code any? Okay, so there's some new questions. You mentioned Drupal was initially favored over WordPress for institutional use. Is this still the case, or an old misunderstanding implication? It is definitely. I don't want to say definitely. I think so. So WordPress has made a lot of ground, and its user base has really swelled, and there's been more systems that have been able to like deploy multiple instances of WordPress that are independent, but it still itself is more constricted as a framework than Drupal. So the big institutions that I know tend to prefer to go towards Drupal because it also has had that history of institutional support. And so the tools for it are more robust. Now, that being said, PHP is not favored. It's not the cool kid on the block. So there might be a lot of other things. What are the main functional differences between Drupal and WordPress from a maintenance perspective? So the WordPress, I think, has a better system for doing updates. You can basically click a button and it will, update to the next version. Drupal tends to have a little more work to do that way. I know that has gotten better in version 9. I'm working on Drupal 7. And I'm using a system, a backend. So everything's on GitHub or Git, and then it's backed up several different ways. But it does take a little bit of work to do those updates. So somebody says, never develop in production. Yeah, so that's a principle that, so for the website, I have 3 instances of it. And I didn't get into this. So I have a development instance, I have a staging instance, and I have a production instance. We were in the production instance, and I was going and manipulating various things within it. So the rule of not developing in production, so you basically don't want to do anything that could damage your site, either through creating a greater performance demand or through adding erroneous code or other things. So you always want to work in a situation where you can't damage your live site, and then move to production. So because I wasn't doing, I was just The only thing I saved, I think, was a view. So there was really no chance of a problem in working in production in that case. But had I been doing more significant modifications, it would absolutely be a good idea to do it inside of development and work it through. Or hackable. No, I'm guessing it's from the earlier question. Is it hackable? Well, everything's hackable. And there are lots of, so the most often it would be a configuration error. It would be somebody giving permission to a user who shouldn't have permission. There is a module that's very dangerous called, like it's a PHP filter, and it allows you to run PHP, allows you to select to run PHP within your site by cutting and pasting it into a box. And if you have that, it provides the opportunity to make that mistake. And so, you have to enable those sorts of modules with caution. So I would say Drupal is, if you're sticking to the mainstream modules, is they have some guarantees about its effectiveness. There's a security team. So it is very, very secure when configured correctly, when using good modules, and when not making bad mistakes in what permissions you give people. Besides Simply Test Me, we also have softdelicious.com. Cool. I haven't tried Softdelicious. I apologize that I tried Simply Test Me last night and earlier today, and everything was working. And that's just the rule of presentations. You don't always get what you want. I don't know why. It'll probably start working immediately after this presentation. Yeah. And so that's, there's more questions popping up. So do you want to generate reports for, let's say, which tools do you have to use for MakeHaven doing YouTube videos, matter of adding content and so on. So I do a bunch of reports and I can show those to you guys. I used a plugin called Charts, which then uses the Google API, and I used views. And so views, I select the type of data I want and then add the filters I want. And then the Google API, the module, will produce the chart I want. So why don't I share my screen again and I will show you. So this is meant as a back-end thing for staff. And I use it for reporting for the board. So it's not quite as refined, but it'll give you the idea of what I do. Which tab am I in? Well, we'll just share one. All right. So I'm going to go to MakeHaven/charts. Okay. So on this page, I have different views that I've set up. So these are the various metrics that I think are important demographic metrics to track for the membership. So for example, what is the type on their profile? So most are standard, some are students, some are on scholarship, and so on. We are, tracking ethnicity as a way to understand our success in our initiatives to be inclusive and bring diversity. And so you can see, what the up to the moment numbers are for how people have self-selected into different, different categories. And then I've used exposed filters to be able to say, all right, I can dial it down to like who's on scholarship, who's has household membership or corporate membership. Are we doing better within male or female categorizations within a different ethnicity? Then I have some other ones. So like within the past year. So if I look at what is our composition of new members who are still currently members in the last year, we see that these numbers have shifted. And I can start to compare those. I can look at age. Age I break out a little differently. I should probably not get into that because people may not want their age revealed. But you can break out age and, the reason for ending your membership. I have more data so I can dial into things like the duration of how long you've had your membership and when you quit and why you quit. These are all performance metrics that we use to understand if we're running the space well, and what we can do to help retain people. So that's basically for when you say charts. If I was doing a table, I would just do it as a plain old view of the data in the system. But in the case of wanting charts and so on, I use that plugin to make them. So we are at the hour. I think I'll wrap up the official proceedings here so that folks that have other obligations can depart. But I'm happy to hang out for a few minutes and answer questions that you have about Drupal as you feel fit. So feel free to unmute if that's sometimes that's easier to ask a question that way. And see, I like to help Julia with nonprofit. Is there any way? Okay, yeah. So, yeah. What question? Are there any remaining questions, or have I'd like to know if I've overwhelmed you or excited you as far as what's available. Okay, so getting some new questions. If you have a voice one, you want to ask? Or maybe not. So I see, how did you learn Drupal? Do you recommend to take a Drupal course somewhere? Honestly, I learned by trial and error. I learned so I read a bunch, and I read that particularly at the time I started back on Drupal 6, I mean, 10 years ago or something crazy, 7 years ago, I don't know. But I read that it was the most robust system where you could do the most without having to do a ton of coding. And with the group I was working with, I wanted to be able to empower people to make changes. And so I'd really worked on building a distribution for United Ways, so I could sort of have like a standard template that I could give them, and then they could, customize it themselves. And so Drupal really seemed like a good fit. And I just started, I installed the basic version, played with it, broke it, played with it again, broke it, started reading about why I'm breaking it, fixed some things, went through, and watched a ton of YouTube videos, but I never took a formal class. I did attend some of the conferences. There's DrupalCon, and they're great. And that's how you build knowledge. But certainly a class would be a great way to get started and really dive into it. All right, more questions. Love to stick around and talk. Look forward to the next programming hangout. Cool. Great. So I think if you have a question that I have missed, please repeat it in the chat or unmute and let me know so that I am not ignoring you. Great. Yeah, I would play around with the testing frameworks, see what you can get. And then the next thing I would do is I'd use Pantheon.io, and they allow you to spin up a test site for free, and then you can just keep it there and keep working on it. When you go to pay for it, I think it is $40 a month to put a domain name on it, but they automatically do the development, staging, test. You can also set up backups that are happening like every 2 hours. So it's no matter how you break your site, they have the code and the data. Everything is using best practices for keeping it safe. There are other hosts. Acquia is another one. They tend to hit like even higher end institutional sort of targets. And I've used them as well. I actually prefer Pantheon for the type of work that I'm doing and I expect you'll be doing. And there's certainly others. You could build it yourself on your own server if you want, but make sure you know what you're doing as far as backups and recovery, and test your backups. That's don't guess that your backups work. Test them. So that's my advice. With that, I will hang out for a few minutes just in case anybody has any last minute burning questions, but I'll call it a wrap.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. I mean, it's largely a language I don't speak, but still really cool.
Yeah,
Get it.
yeah. Once you get the concepts, it starts to fit together. So play with it, and good luck.
Yes. Moderately less terrifying now. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.